The biggest challenge for any country, whether your own people, your own investors, or for a foreign investor, is whether you believe in the promise that the future will bring. Whether you start believing and you don't believe in it and you've lost that confidence, then that's a systemic, fundamental issue that the nation needs to put its head together, and state institution needs to put their head together and solve. That promise, that commitment has to be believed in, and that's the fundamental architecture of any state. Pakistan in 2010 was perhaps 5 years ahead of peers. I'm including India in that as well. Whatever we did in the Federal Board of Revenue was 5 to 10 years ahead of what India had done. At this point in time, we feel we're 5 years behind, minimum 5 years behind. But are we so far behind that we can't have that leapfrog opportunity? No, because some of the fundamental building blocks are now here. Now with Rast, I can send you the details of who am I, why am I paying you, what's the invoice, what's the contract, what's the asset. When every node gets digitized, there'll be more transparency, and as a byproduct of transparency is better tax collection and better law enforcement. Pakistan is a long game. The economy is asymmetric, the cycles are very short, so you have to be for the long run. There's no short sprint over here. We have close to 60 large corporations, anchors as you would call them, and then their distributors. This total throughput is almost 2.5 trillion rupees worth of money movement. And within that, there are about close to 7,000 distributors, dealers, agents that have been onboarded, and an equal amount of agents and distributors that still remain to be onboarded, that were in the process, that the operations team is gradually training and bringing on board. It is not even 1% of the potential that the Pakistani B2B supply chain carries. What we've built is indigenous Islamic financial solutions that have a market in other Muslim countries. Even the large oil-rich economies, it's highly underserved. Our business is to move the truth. Our business is not to move the money. We're processors of truth. And for that, we have to be very, very honest people.
Omer, welcome to Venture Journeys. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
To begin with, let's define Haball क्या चीज़ है, Haball क्या करती है?
So Haball एक B2B supply chain payments and financing की fintech है. What that basically means कि पाकिस्तानी supply chains जो हैं from vendor, manufacturer, distributor, retailer, एक जो supply chain है उसकी जो भी payments और financing और invoicing की needs है, Haball as a fintech fulfills those needs by integrating with the financial services on the banking side, and then on the demand side, where all these corporations, their large manufacturers, connects to their ERPs, and then through our platform aggregates their distributor network or retailer network so that they can get an invoice from a manufacturer, make a digital payment across any bank, and then be able to receive Islamic financing based on the payment and invoice data that we have.
बिल्कुल सही है. So अगर मैं इसको simplify करूँ तो एक manufacturer है like a Unilever or like a Coca-Cola. उसने जब अपने डिस्ट्रीब्यूटर को सामान दिया तो उसने डिस्ट्रीब्यूटर को इनवॉइस भेजना, all of that is being automated. And so what was the gap? How was this before Haball came about?
So it was broken into three distinct areas. Most companies probably didn't even have primary sales and ordering and invoicing system, so it was manual invoicing. That's still the case. And the ones that they did have ordering or invoicing platform, it wasn't integrated to the financial ecosystem. And for the payment collection part, most of them used very large banks for cash management, where people would actually go physically to a branch and submit the payment and then WhatsApp them the image or make a phone call and confirm that we've made the payment so that the order or the goods could be received or the invoice could be cleared. All of that required manual reconciliation, a lot of phone calls, and the turnaround time was anywhere between 3 to 5 business days. That's a very big gap in terms of money that should be in Unilever's account, but it's not there because it's a very broken process. We've automated all of that. So it's instant digital invoicing, instant payment notifications, settlements within the same day. So all of that potential treasury loss is now recovered because we're able to settle on the same day using digital instruments.
Okay. And in this 7-year journey so far, alhamdulillah, 7-year journey, what has been the stages or phases of your growth?
Okay, so I think the first 3 years were largely spent on building the infrastructure. And in these 3 years, 1 year was COVID as well. So you have to understand the dynamics of not being able to go into the market because of lockdown. But an interesting thing happened within the first 3 years was that we became the first organization within the country that got funded by the central bank, by State Bank of Pakistan, through a grant for further expanding the scope of the product. We started off as a digital invoicing and payment system, but we became a digital financing solution as well for these supply chains.
Right.
So that was a state bank funded program. And in the first 3 years, when COVID ended, we came out on the market with essentially an ordering, invoicing, payments, and Islamic financing product. And then the commercial launch, in effect, happened in 2021. And I'll tell you why it took 3 years. The reason is because plugging into our banking ecosystem is very time consuming. And you have to also appreciate that the VC market or the funding market matured after 2021. So in that time, funding was basically anything that you had raised in the beginning. And so I always thought that given that Pakistan is a very complex and uncertain market where there's, 2018, the dollar shot up from 100 rupees when we started the company, and it was around 155. We went into an IMF program. And in that time, I realized that the gestation for setting up this ecosystem is going to be longer than what we had earlier anticipated. So I thought we're not going to trade money with results at this point in time. We're going to trade time with results, because just spend more time, spend less money, and develop the ecosystem. Because you see, corporate banking, which is where we are, or corporate payments or corporate distributed financing, are not areas that you ascribe to a fintech. So to be able to win that trust in the minds of our customers for organizations as big as Coke or Pepsi, takes a really long time. And at least in the beginning, it's a chicken and egg problem. Do you have enough banks? And then you can go to the corporates, and the corporates are saying, do you have enough banks that we will use you? Within that 2-3 years of finding your space where you can start actually commercially selling it, that takes a lot of time. But the good thing that came out of it was that has now become a barrier to entry, because you're able to plug into so many banking channels to be able to process large value transactions across those channels. And then the financing infrastructure to be able to produce software assets and house them within a bank so that they could finance your transaction. That is where the time was spent. And right after COVID, because suddenly there was an appetite for experimenting with digital solutions, and we got some fantastic first few customers, multinational companies or large Pakistani corporates, that started using it. And once they used it and it scaled, then obviously it's just referencing your past work to be able to get the new work.
Right. So if I were to summarize, I think it's a very classic case of venture building, that you started building the product in 2017.
2018 to be precise.
2018 to be precise. But you actually went out to the market in 2021 to start selling the service.
Yes.
So it took you about 3 years to build the product, make all the relationships.
Yes.
Okay. So after 2021, when you went into the market, how soon did you start bringing in was there a revenue? What's the revenue model?
There are 3 areas of revenue. One is the fee that we make on invoice processing,
right.
The initial licensing or implementation or subscription that we charge.
Right.
Then every time we move money, there's a transactional throughput charge that we apply. And then on financing, when the bank finances these transactions, then there's a portion of the banking margin that we get from the bank. So those are the 5 streams. And if you look at how it's structured, it's a setup fee so that the customers do take it very seriously, that this is an implementation. It will require, it's a B2B implementation. It's not plug and play. We have to have some sort of bespoke development done for you to be able to plug into your supply chain. Every supply chain has its unique flavors. And then once we start processing it, then you operate as a cloud sort of service provider. So there's throughput that you have to charge. And then on the financing, because the bank is using you as an aggregator of financeable data, then obviously the bank then pays you to be able to finance your distributors and your customers. So that's how it's structured in terms of revenue attribution at various stages.
Right.
And in 2021, once we sort of came out in the market, we had figured out our pricing. That experimentation was over. The first few customers who started using it scaled really quickly, to our surprise. And the strain of handling that kind of customer volume. I'll tell you something very interesting about business payments. We have this word that we've internally coined, it's called responsible payments, which is that if you lose 6,000 rupees in an e-commerce transaction or an ATM or an IBFT, yes, you'll be worried, but you're not going to be screaming and shouting. You're not going to have sleepless nights. In a B2B payment, a single payment starts with 1.8 million rupees, goes as high as 70 million rupees. That's one transaction that we process. This guy is probably going to burn something if he doesn't get his money back. So the turnaround time in terms of operation, the criticality of making sure that it works, availability of the system, because these are decisions that he has to make that will end up shelving a store with that beverage or that soap or that ghee ka dabba, So that all of those things are critical for a supply chain. And in that sense, we had to be very responsible of the volume that we can address in a meaningful way, where if there is an issue, we should be able to address it within 1 hour, because this man will not wait. He will not wait. It's his entire working capital that is stuck up because of a system error. So we had to really be careful in scaling the system. This is an enterprise product being used by some of the largest supply chains in the country, and their business availability, their product sale depends on the fidelity of our messaging. So we had to make sure that we were onboarding customers 2021 who were very large supply chains, who had their own IT infrastructure was very mature, so that once we integrate into them, they would be able to have secure communications with us. And that kind of customer base forced a kind of mindset within Haball, a DNA, I would say, that we're serving premium customers, so we should have premium services. And then let's just stay within this premium neighborhood, because these are high maintenance customers. They have a lot of bespoke requests. Every supply chain has its own unique requirements. And let's build the system that just serves that need with that responsibility. Once you build that culture, eventually other customers will seek you, because they know that you're providing a premium product, which the banks are too standardized. The bank products are too standardized. They will not be able to serve those unique needs. And then the rest of the fintechs who are doing fantastic work within the consumer space do not have the motivation to get into B2B, because they're looking at mass market productization. Right. So that's been our approach post 2021. And I think over the years, we've just consolidated around the approach and not really tried to break that mold, even though some opportunities seem very exciting. But we've stayed within that mold till now.
So who were some of your earlier clients? Let's talk about जो आपके साथ शुरू में जिन्होंने early adapters.
I think some of the people that I would really want to credit, because early on, they supported us. Organizations like Continental Biscuit, Serene Air, National Foods. National Food has been extremely supporting. Even in this central bank pilot that we were running, they were the first ones to sign up. Unilever participated in that pilot as well. But what really took us by storm was Coca-Cola beverages. That was a game changer in every way. They have all our products, and as a result, they've matured our behavior as well. The customer that makes you a man, that kind of customer. So yeah, Coca-Cola has been a game changer. And then since then, so many good names, companies like the Atlas Group with the kind of mature finance team that they have. then every customer, and if just by hearing these names, you would realize that these are very mature, well-governed organizations, and they expect the best from you, and they expect you to, and they inform your product growth as well. So every time they tell us that this is something that you need to focus on, that's something that you can improve. I think that provided us with the intellectual capital that we wouldn't have gotten within our own sort of skill set.
So when you introduce this new way of working, I would call it, कि जहाँ पे आप digitize किया आपने. So for companies like Unilever, Coca-Cola, National Foods, Continental, they expect payment from their distributors.
Yes.
And obviously they want everything, all the records to be maintained, and you digitized all of that to ensure they get paid right away. And they had banks also, and you had banks also, उनके जो होंगे जो ensure करें कि जी ये पैसे इनके पास आ जाएं. But when you look at the third party, which is the distributors predominantly हमारे यहाँ local companies हैं. So did you find any kind of resistance, or if resistance is not any new way of working, वो थोड़ा सा एक नए तरीके से काम करने में क्या कुछ challenge ऐसा आया? And how did that work? Like what enabled that transition?
जो culture है around digital trust, branch में जाना, बात करना, रसीद पे ठप्पा लगाना, and the confidence that you have with that, इसको break करने में जाहिर है कि there's a lot of training and support that you need. In 2021, we formed a new department within the company called Customer Success Operation. We hired a GM who came from distribution management in FMCGs. And I want to credit him particularly for that, Mohsen, that because he understood the mindset of the distributor, he created a department within him across Pakistan, serving 145 cities, to be able to train these distributors, to be able to win that trust, that first transaction, to 500 rupees. Just try it. When he sees how convenient it is, before that he would have had to drive for 30 minutes to make a payment, and then had to make a couple of phone calls to confirm whether the payment went through to Coca-Cola. So that entire effort by his team, I think that really brought the results, because we're not just a payment platform that you plugged in and you're on your own. There's a lot of hand-holding that we're doing during the delivery stage, where we're integrating and customizing the product so that it works for your particular supply chain. And then once you're live, you may have 600 distributors or 900 agents. It's that team's job to make sure that they're onboarded, they're using it, weekly monitoring, daily monitoring, turnaround time, that we're resolving their issues within 1 hour if there are any settlement lags, training issues, errors. I think that ability to serve your customer with a lot of hand-holding, again, it's a necessity for B2B payments. Right. If this was consumer payments, you can't do hand-holding for 1 million customers. But with a B2B population that's limited, 5,000-7,000 distributors, MSMEs, it's something then that requires, at least at the beginning, in the first 4-5 months, that you have to provide some sort of hand-holding.
What are those wins that you would probably realize for the distributor side of the business?
I'll give you an example of someone who is in a far-flung mountainous area near Nathia Gali. And previously, he buys cables from one of our customers. And previously, he would have to drive for like 1 hour to go to the branch where that company had a cash management relationship. Oh, okay. And that obviously means that now he can make a payment any time of the day, because we get IP traceability. We see sometimes people making payments in Haram while performing Umrah. So that convenience is obviously irreplaceable. And once you've done it, you realize that all of us who pay our children's fees or make a internet payment, now that we do it online, we realize that we're never getting in the queue, parking the car to make that payment at the branch. So once they use it, that reluctance immediately goes away. But there is also something very important, that in our approach, it's called top-down, which is the manufacturer has bought our product and his distributors have to use it. Right. Yes, they can be slow in their adoption, but in most supply chains, it is something that's mandatory for them. They have to use it. And that's a deliberate approach that we took, because we understand that these large brands have a lot of influence on their supply chains. Not just the distributors, downstream to the retailers, they can change their behavior in terms of how they get an invoice and make a payment.
So as at the end of November 2024, can you give a sense of your ecosystem? Like how many customers do you have on let's say the corporate side, your banks, relationship with the banks, and on this side, the distributors who are using your product?
Let me explain the supply side first. So on the banks, we're available on all digital channels with high limits because we're processing B2B transactions. So we can do large value transactions, settling that same day, 3 times a day, in fact. Then all the branches that are available in the country, at least most of them, probably 11 to 12,000 branches, will accept payments for Haball generated vouchers. And we are also now becoming the first payment initiation service provider on a central bank rail called RAST. So that's something that we're going to release next year, inshallah. And so that's on the payment side. On financing side, we have about 4 banks that use our supply chain financing platform. We also got selected by the central bank as a multi-bank supply chain financing platform in Pakistan. And we're probably by next year onboard 3 more banks on this platform where they'll be able to finance our aggregated supply chains for distributor financing, but in Islamic mode. So invoice-based financing, Murabaha, inventory-based financing, Tijara, and some other products that we're creating in that space. So that's the supply side. On the demand side, we have close to 60 large corporations, anchors as you would call them, and then their distributors. This total churn, this total throughput is almost 2.5 trillion rupees worth of money movement. And within that, there are about close to 7,000 distributors, dealers, agents that have been onboarded, and an equal amount of agents and distributors that still remain to be onboarded, that were in the process, that the operations team is gradually training and bringing on board. So I would say at a broad level, these are some of the KPIs that we're chasing, but it is not even 1% of the potential that the Pakistani B2B supply chain carries.
In this 7 years, let me begin by asking कि ये जो idea of going after this gap or this opportunity, वो idea कब आया और कब आपने उस पे full time काम करना शुरू किया? Was there a gap? Like you spent some time with the idea before you started?
So I was working on this payments digitization project for the Federal Board of Revenue in 2016 and 17, where B2G and P2G payment collections had to be digitized as part of the trade facilitation agreement that Pakistan had signed. So I was a contracted consultant for FBR back then. And I learned how payments can be collected and digitized against a CPR or a payment challan that FBR would send to the taxpayer. So acquired the skills over there, and while I was figuring that out, I thought this is a larger opportunity because this is just FBR collects 12.9 trillion rupees in taxation. 80% of it moves through that system that we built in 2016, and this can be replicated across other industries as well. And because it took FBR nearly 1 year to build it out, I thought, if Coca-Cola wanted it or National Foods wanted it, they're not going to invest that kind of time to build out this kind of infrastructure. Why don't I make that one thing, and then we can scale it across multiple supply chains? Right. And why I chose B2B was that I've always been an institutional person, had no understanding of, never been in a consumer business, right. So don't understand the psychology of it. And then there are too many players within that space. Banks are already serving that need. There are too many fintechs trying to figure out consumer finance. So with that mindset, no plans to start a business. But one evening, one of my partners, who's the chairman of the board, he and I were having this coffee at Board Basin, the one that's right next to KFC, 7-Star. Okay. They have that traditional coffee. So we were having that coffee late in the night, sitting in the car, talking about what I was doing with FBR. And I said, listen, just fantasizing that wouldn't it be great if I could just build this out and we could sell it to the corporations? And he said, let's do it. Why don't we do it together? You figured out the rails. Let's just build it. So I brushed it off, but then he was very serious about it and sort of him and his friend, in a way, ganged up on the ideas. You should do it. And we started with that basic intention, and then we thought that rather than creating a fresh company, why don't we buy some IT company that already has registrations and everything. Just buy that. Made an attempt, but there was nothing that we could trust. Every company has some skeletons, so just didn't want to inherit someone else's skeletons. And eventually flew into Dubai to meet the other partner, and just in a hotel with a really bad 5-page slide that I made during the flight, I showed it to them, and they didn't even look at it. They just closed it and said, trust you enough to know what you're doing. Let's just start. So got the registration done by August, and then eventually in 2018, I started hiring my team and started building it out. So that's how it happened. More of that you've done it before, why can't you do it for the larger industry? You've done it for the government, which we later realized was a completely different ballgame, because when you're doing it for the government, it's the law, it's mandatory, you just have to do it. But when you're doing it commercially, you have to sell the value, and you have to beg and plead and argue your way through it. So that was different.
How have you funded the journey so far?
So it's largely equity and grants. Started with friends and family, what I mentioned before. And then a grant from the central bank supported us through that COVID time. And then I think two significant funding equity investments that came in was from a large Pakistani business sort of association, two business families. They invested within Haball, and which was really good, because that was just around the time when we commercially launched the product. The product was there with zero transactions, just very little transactions. But they sort of saw through the commercial scale up. Not only were they instrumental in trying to position us to be able to grab what we can immediately get, which was distributed payments and distributed financing, but they also brought in very strong governance as well, because they came from a lot of public listed companies, strong governance, and always on the side of caution and compliance and regulatory discipline. And I have to credit that to those guys, that they were able to bring that on the board.
Okay, wonderful. Now, when some of these decisions were being made, partnerships were happening, I would like to learn how some of those decisions around how much salary are you going to take, how much equity other people are going to take. How was that for Haball?
See, if you remember that before 2021, there was no venture capital, there was no concept of a founder, entrepreneur fighting the world all alone. Those things were acquired tastes for our industry, and with that sort of naivety, you start your business. But the partners that I've had have always been extremely hands-off. They have said, this is the guy that we trust. We'll let him make a decision about personal compensation, about equity, and all of those things. So, and as the company moved through different stages of the company, that structure also evolved with the need of the time. So when 2021, VC private equity starts to look at Pakistan, you need to change the structure of the organization to behave in a certain way, and we were able to make those changes at the right stages. But really, it has been in the last 6 years, they have completely taken their hands off that kind of functional management, and to act like the board, the one that would challenge your assumptions, the one that would be validating your ideas or challenging them, and of course governance, that you have to make sure that you comply to all laws and you play by the book. So that kind of role, the way it should be, the way any board should be. So we've been very fortunate in the sense that right from the beginning, and again, these individuals, if you look at them personally, they are all extremely well qualified individuals at the pinnacle of their careers in terms of the businesses that they run or the companies that they work for. They bring that credibility in their personal lives, in their professional careers, that when they operate at the board, they know exactly what their role is.
Amazing. So you spoke about governance and you spoke about being fair. I've listened to some of your other podcasts as well. So tell us about the importance of corporate governance and that integrity that entrepreneurs need to bring. And what is that mindset, and how is that needed for longer term or even going through tough times?
When you're in the business of processing invoices and payments and financing, in essence, you're a processor of truth. जब आपका काम ये है कि आपने किसी इंसान तक सच पहुंचाना है या किसी इदारे तक सच पहुंचाना है, तो उसके लिए ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है कि आप खुद भी मुखबर सादिक हो, कि आप एक सच्चे खबर देने वाले हों. तो आपकी अपनी इंटेग्रिटी, आपकी अपनी गवर्नेंस, आपके अपने सेग्रीगेशन ऑफ पावर्स, आपके अपने ऑडिट एंड कंट्रोल्स बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. And when you're moving financial data, this is why the central bank in every country regulates this space. But it's a slippery slope for them, because if they over-regulate, they strangulate innovation. And if they under-regulate, it could create distress for the public. So finding that right balance, because there is no known universally accepted framework for regulating fintechs, right? There are payment systems providers, there are EMIs, there are banking regulations. But specifically, there are many fintech structures where the central bank or any central bank struggles to find the right mix. And to give credit to our central bank, they've let innovation flourish by giving custodianship or creating some sort of guardrails with existing regulated entities. So for instance, in our case, there's a lot of compliance and control or transitive regulatory control that comes through our custodian bank that manages our relationship. So this is how the central bank schemes things to make sure that public trust is maintained, because this is a very big responsibility, moving people's money or giving them an instruction with which they'll release their goods or clear their invoices or get financing, get that money back with the chances of a default. So that's entirely pegged on the data streams that you're providing. This means that your internal controls and behavior has to be very well managed and well regulated, with segregation of powers, audits, controls, cybersecurity, all of those things. And again, it comes back to the character of the founding team. It comes back to the board, who these individuals are.
Right.
What kind of businesses are they running in their own lives?
Right.
Are they well-governed businesses, professionals who are known for a strong audit and compliance discipline? Or they are, they don't carry that kind of reputation, which is very important in the financial services. You have to keep on telling your team that our business is to move the truth. Our business is not to move the money. We're processors of truth. And for that, we have to be very, very honest people.
With regards to your culture in the organization, क्या कोई ऐसी चीज़ें हैं जो यूनिक हैं जो आपने स्टार्ट की हैं या प्रैक्टिस करते हैं टू इंश्योर कि जो मैनेजमेंट टीम, फाउंडिंग टीम और बोर्ड जिस इंटेग्रिटी के साथ चाहेंगे ये बिजनेस रन हो, टू मेक श्योर कि आपकी टीम भी दे फाइंड इट ईजी, दे फाइंड इट अ प्रोसेस टू लिव विद दैट?
जो फाउंडिंग टीम है वो सारी खुद एक बहुत रिच कॉर्पोरेट करियर से आई हुई है. एक्स multinational companies, global exposure, local exposure, banking. So they obviously bring in a lot of things that originally I don't have as a founder, and they've brought that to the table, and they're very strong in that. And you have to make sure that where they are wrong, you're not overriding them just because you want to override them or you think you know everything. You don't know everything. That's why these guys are sitting there. One thing is very clear is that there's a commitment towards truth. You have to be very, very honest to your customers. You have to be very honest to yourselves, to your board. The way you present your data, your management reports, your quarterly reports, you really bring it to them. Whatever the risks are, you tell them that. Whatever good or bad happens out of monthly performance or yearly performance, you have to be very blunt about this. So monthly internal management reviews have to be very blunt and very honest. And even with customers, if something is not working, you give them the right commitment. We make sure that we follow our commitment. So if we say that it's going to be done on the 29th, has to be done on the 29th. If for unavoidable reasons it can't happen, then be very honest and apologize that this is the reason why we could not make it possible. This ability to masquerade and polish the truth in our segment it's very dangerous and it creates a bad culture. So what I appreciate about this team is that they're honest. They will say what they have to say. They'll push back where they need to push back. And I think that culture has prevailed, and I hope that it flourishes, that you just have to be very honest with each other, consult each other before you make any decisions. Once you've made your decision, you stick to your wicket, keep batting with a straight bat, don't try to play any fancy shots. And again, because you're in a corporate supply chain, it's always better to be conservative rather than to be too aggressive in your posturing towards achieving something, because you're in a very tightly regulated space where on the one side are banks and the regulator, and the other side are some of the largest corporations. And within this tight corner, it's best to behave with a lot of caution.
तो आपने 2016 2017 में आपने गवर्नमेंट के साइड पे भी डिजिटाइजेशन को होते हुए देखा है, आपने लार्ज ग्लोबल सेबर की अगर मैं एग्जांपल दूं, वहाँ पे भी आपने देखा कि हाउ डू दे एयरलाइंस का पूरा सिस्टम वो कैसे काम करता है. सो यू बीन क्लोज टू डिजिटाइजेशन ऑल योर लाइफ. So where are we on our journey according to you, and how do you see that as a potential going forward? I mean, everyone speaks about the potential, but if you can give us some grounded evidence.
Pakistan in 2010 was perhaps 5 years ahead of peers, and I'm including India in that as well. Whatever we did in the Federal Board of Revenue was 5 to 10 years ahead of what India had done. At this point in time, we feel we're 5 years behind, minimum 5 years behind regional comparison. But are we so far behind that we can't have that leapfrog opportunity? No, because some of the fundamental building blocks are now here. For instance, the biggest one is State Bank of Pakistan, Rast. That is a reset button. That's a game changer because of so many reasons: instant settlement, accessibility, the ability to move non-payment contextual data will open up more transparency within the economy. So those are fundamental things that maybe the common man might not experience, but in the design or architectural level, you can clearly see long-term impact of an infrastructure that the central bank has placed now. So that's the first thing that's happened. On the taxation side, things are not that rosy, and it's not because the legal infrastructure or the technology infrastructure is lacking. All those capabilities are within Pakistan. It's largely because we've had too many changes in a very short time in terms of leadership, in terms of reform is a 3 to 5 year journey, and you have to be very consistent in terms of the leadership that runs the reform, and the capital commitment that you have to give, that you have to provide to make sure that the reform lasts. And then iteratively you keep on improving as you take it to the market. That hasn't happened on the taxation side. And given that after devolution, taxation is now 5 jurisdictions, so that also makes it way more complicated in terms of having that single experience that a business or a consumer would want in terms of his relationship with the state when he has to pay his taxes. So there is definitely a strong narrative that we've experienced in the last 4 or 5 years in terms of reforms in taxation. Multiple attempts, you get private sector specialists, you get consultants, you get all of those things. So you can't say that they're not doing it. They're absolutely serious about it. There have been fundamental changes within the laws, Income Tax Ordinance, Customs Act, the Sales Tax Act, in making some of these reforms. So I would say that the legislative framework now exists, which is a great win. The narrative and the interventions have been identified now. That's another win. Okay. And the interventions have been internalized, and not only have they been internalized, they're part of the legal structure now. That's a major win. This is something that takes in itself 2 to 3 years to cultivate. That's happened, that's behind us. Now it's just really about implementation of those reforms with consistency and with firmness, because when reform happens, obviously it will ruffle feathers. But you have to stay on the wicket. You can't give up too soon. The problem is when public pressure mounts, then they try to change the fundamental design of the reform, and that's when it starts to break, as you've seen with their repeated attempts in trying to tax the retailers.
Yes. So speaking of the retailers, let's now talk about the supply chain digitization in the country. So manufacturers to distributors, that's where Haball is working. you've spoken about that also. So from distributors, it goes into retailers.
Yes.
Or agar agents hain beech mein, but largely it just trickles down to the retailer before it goes to the consumer. So in this space, which is after Haball, distributor to retailers, what has been the developments and what's that? उसमें कैसे digitization हो रही है? If you can talk about that.
इसमें दो तीन इदारे हैं that have to be appreciated for some groundbreaking work that they've done. My friend Yasser Memon at Salesflow, fantastic guy, and his partner Sharoon, they have done some phenomenal work in trying to digitize what we call secondary sales, distributor to retail function.
Right.
We have a payments first approach, so we've always been shy and we make an attempt and then we get scared and then we come back. So we've just been cautious about that sector, but they have done some brilliant work with at least 40 of the largest supply chains in the country to make sure that the distributors are able to, for their leg for secondary sales, their sales and distribution management, invoicing, payment reconciliation, journey planning, sales planning, how much order you can push towards them, all those analytics around sales performance, all of that has been brilliantly done by that organization. And there are other organizations within the same discipline, but the way that they've done it is outstanding. And I think this helps other organizations in understanding that once you've digitized the secondary sale leg as a large supply chain in terms of ordering, invoicing, payments, ordering and invoicing, then it allows companies like us or banks to come in and have that reliable data to be able to process their payments and to be able to finance that leg.
Right.
They've done that necessary spade work. I think the market is now ripe. The only reason why it didn't happen is because the retail sector in Pakistan has been under a lot of stress recently because of inflation and taxation. And it's a matter of timing, but it's inevitable. It will happen. Once that happens, it will immediately help the tax authorities then to be able to get more serviceable data for them to be able to tax it appropriately. Right now, this generic approach that they've applied in taxing this sector which is why it keeps on failing. That's the reason why, because they create this one rule where a small Kriana or a jeweler has to pay the same amount of taxation. That approach doesn't work. So you have to take a more methodic approach. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, the environment will be right. But again, there has to be policy consistency. Mm-hmm. If you keep on trying to redesign, then it will turn into something mutated that will work in isolation but cannot scale across the entire country.
I think this is what we keep hearing from everyone, the consistency in policy. Now let's talk about your vision on the kind of data that you are collecting and what sort of intelligence would you like to provide to the market. And let me just state, for banks, you are thinking, that's what you are planning to enable financing for companies and businesses. I'm sure that intelligence will come into play.
Yeah.
You can speak about that also. But if there is anything else as intelligence that you can add for decision making.
I think the byproduct of any digitization of supply chain is two essential benefits that the banks draw and one benefit that the other regulators, law enforcement can draw. First, talking about the banks, to be able to identify a safe financing opportunity, a liquidity solution. That's the first thing that you can identify, because when they process data and invoicing through you, you understand their sales and purchases, and then you're able to use some sort of analytics or algorithms and inform the bank that that's a guy you can finance, and we've seen his history. We know he doesn't default and he has room to grow in this business. He needs that extra liquidity. So that is the first thing that our data now provides to the banks. The second thing is that once you have given him financing, there's a lot of credit governance that is required, which is data driven, to be able to see that is he about to default. There's some signals and cues that data will start, data starts to sing certain songs and you realize it's telling you something, that he needs more money or he's about to go bust or there's a challenge here. Comparative analysis, year-on-year analysis, monthly growth trajectory, what's happening within the region. multiple factors that we've applied into this new feature that we've recently shipped out to our banking partners called default early warning signals. It's using our data to provide that intelligence that this guy is about to go bust. You can please make some intervention and use those supply chain anchors to make sure that he doesn't default. So that's the second thing. And this was probably the missing piece, that you're able to disperse, but you're not able to govern. And we're very focused on the governance aspect, of course, to make sure that when banks are trusting us as their corporate aggregators for this data, our data should be able to speak that language to them so that they're able to intercept any potential default. All of this data, whether financing data or payment data or sales and distribution data, creates an ecosystem where there's a lot of transparency. Pakistani supply chains are largely opaque, very foggy. It's very hard to distill what's good, what is bad. Doesn't mean all of them are crooks. In the sense of the word, when you call sales tax fraud, that's not what's happening. The economic incentive, or the way the economy is structured, the way your own supplier or the way your own buyer is structured, you're also forced to remain gray. And it can only happen through digitization, that when every node gets digitized, there'll be more transparency. And as a byproduct of transparency is better tax collection and better law enforcement. So that's the third benefit that this data will provide. But it's a journey. And like I said, maybe 5 years behind the region, but some of the fundamental building blocks are now here. Just need to have clear policy guidelines and speed ahead on the implementation.
So can you elaborate on the law enforcement bit? How will this data be used for law enforcement?
Yeah. Remember, I talked about RAST being contextual, which is that it's made on a format which allows you to move non-payment data. So when I pay you in the traditional banking rail, it's just, I got debited and you got credited, and this is the amount. But now with RAST, I can send you the details of who am I, why am I paying you, what's the invoice, what's the contract, what's the asset. Right. A lot of things that can be exchanged in the payment messaging. So you can imagine that the payment rail is now a carrier of more contextual data that will be usable for the law enforcement agencies. A very good example is that when you make a payment to an automobile manufacturer, the automobile manufacturer needs to know whether you bought the car or the investor bought the car, because it might be someone else paying you under your CNIC. That data in the traditional rail doesn't travel to the recipient. So he doesn't know whether you bought the car or it was an investor who had 70 cars and he's going to hoard it and then he will sell it at a higher price. This ability is now available with the new payment rails, where contextual data will flow through, and more, anything else that you require can also flow through. Even images can flow through, which will help the recipient or any law enforcement agency that is monitoring these transactions to be able to intercept certain law enforcement issues such as sales tax fraud, anti-money laundering, terror financing, all of the other things that under the post-FATF world that we're living in, those compliances can be ensured at a transactional level without disrupting the life of the user. Because right now you have to sign a lot of forms and declarations to be able to satisfy those needs. So as this gets digitized, the need for the law enforcement to have manual interventions will be eliminated. But again, this is slightly not too far away in the future, but the rail exists, they can create their hooks.
So Omer, you're also a student and a learner of history and philosophy. So with that as a background, I want to set a context. The context is, we've also, under that trade facilitation program that you had mentioned, we've also spoken to organizations like Pakistan Single Window, amazing program, that sort of upgrade of VBOC. So Pakistan Single Window जैसा काम भी हुआ है. So with philosophy and history as a background, and in this context, here are these two forces, एक है जो digitization कर रही है, and एक तरीका चलता आ रहा है. How do you see the next, how will we close 2030, this decade, and how do we need to go move forward?
There's a French philosopher, Jacques Ellul. He talks about this term called technological determinism, and the various kinds, hard determinism and soft determinism, that you place a particular technique into a society and it will create its own value and culture around it. On the contrary, there's another concept called social determinism, that society will determine how that technology will be adopted and at what pace will it be adopted. In urban, cosmopolitan, liberal societies, technological determinism is hard. It makes an impact immediately. In societies where who are more rural or less cosmopolitan, social determinism always prevails. And as any social psychologist, if he's part of economic policy or designing how the country has to be digitized, I think all of these things have to come together, that you're able to see how society and culture behaves in a particular setting, and then to be able to make interventions. Our fault is that sitting in Karachi at Shara Faisal, we see the entire country with our lens, with a hard technological determinism, that if I like it, everyone else will like it, and that doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. You have to have heavily contextualized strategies or tactics on the ground. So that kind of deterministic path is missing, perhaps at a provincial level or a district level. I don't think I've ever spoken about this, but I'll say it now, is there's a degree of provincial and district involvement in our journey towards digitization, to start creating islands or to try to motivate a particular locality toward digital adoption, along with whatever the central bank or the tax authorities are doing to create that environment. See, the taxation authorities can create a demand. They have the instruments to immediately, very rapidly create a demand towards digitization. Similarly, State Bank can provide the infrastructure, or force the banks to provide the infrastructure, and have other tools of reducing cash in circulation to promote digitization. So they have these macro tools that have a very lasting impact. But at the downstream level, there is some local government action that is required if they realize that they should have this part of their portfolio, other than the fact that maybe they're doing fire safety or health or sanitation. Then there is this aspect at the district level that they might have to look into. But I think the core problem still remains that the narrative and the policy structure around digitization has been accepted by the government, by any political government that we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years, and the necessary policy framework or institutions that they have to create, they also do end up doing that as well. The government has its own pace, which is obviously because of bureaucratic reasons or legal reasons. It takes time, which is why we don't see the results as quickly as possible. The government still hasn't learned to engage the private sector in a meaningful way, to execute its wishes in a really efficient way. And this is where their fault lies. Because they can't do that, and it's too complicated, and it might result into procurement or other issues, they try to do it themselves, which is worse. Because now you are reducing the opportunity of the private sector, and you're doing a bad job at it. And I think that's the fundamental flaw at this point in time, that there are too many digital initiatives where the government wants to do it themselves, as opposed to a better approach where the central bank just provides the framework, creates the regulatory environment, and then pushes them to do it themselves, arrange the capital that they need, go after the markets where they can prosper, as opposed to doing everything themselves. And even with RAST, it is not that the central bank is the provider of the financial service, it's just the core infrastructure at the center of it, where banks and fintechs are the distributor of that service.
Right. जैसे डिजिटल ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन में आपकी बात से जो एक चीज़ कनेक्ट हुई वो ये कि डिजिटल ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन में ये होता है ना that you pick out the champions and you give, like, you run a pilot and you say okay, this is how we've been successful here, let's implement in other places as well. So आपके जहन में कभी कोई ऐसा एक आइडिया आया कि maybe this is something that we should test in a district, because आपने बड़ी अच्छी आपने district level की बात की, or do you have any ideas that maybe could be pitched to some of these people के यार
बहुत दफ़ा कर चुका हूँ बहुत दफ़ा पिच कर चुके हैं ऐसे आइडियाज़,
राइट।
कोविड में भी किया था, बाद में भी, और कुछ हद तक सुनते भी हैं, बट ब्रॉडली मैंने कहा है कि हुकूमत को प्राइवेट सेक्टर को इस्तेमाल करने की जो सलाहियत है कि पब्लिक प्राइवेट regulatory framework and then making sure that they achieve the public good that the government wants to create through a private sector party, they're incapable of doing that, or they've not done it enough to develop that skill. But इशू सबसे बड़ा ये आ जाता है कि जब इस तरह की कोई पायलट इम्प्लीमेंटेशन की बात हो जाए तो उसके अंदर जो लीडरशिप होती है, जो भी ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन लीडर होता है ऑन द गवर्नमेंट साइड, टेनर्स इतने छोटे होते हैं कि उसके बाद they don't stay there anymore. There's no motivation for them to stay there, and as a result, they move on to other functions of the government where their careers can grow, and this always remains under capacity or with poor quality of resource that is manning that transformation, which is why we struggle with these things. We've pitched multiple ideas to tax authorities, to other regulators. And not just me, I mean, my colleagues in other fintechs have done these kind of pitches that if you make this intervention, we'll come in, we'll do it for you. But there's always a reluctancy in terms of engaging any private sector party. Exactly. For procurement reasons, for reputational loss, a lot of fears that bureaucrats have that prevents them from doing it. But if you see, in other countries, it doesn't happen. You know, there are superpowers who would move their 6th fleet in your neighborhood if you talk about penalizing some of their big tech companies, or if you think about applying tariffs. That's how the state protects your own private sector. But over here, there is a fear that our own private sector is out here to scam us. And because of, and it's not that it doesn't happen, it does happen, but because of that, there is no desire to protect or to defend these kind of initiatives, and the best way to achieve the same objective is do it yourself. Just build out that tech yourself, build a department, build a company, and do it yourself.
Right. I think engagement methodology at every level, also to engage private sector, but then that entire intervention, how you engage with the local people, जिस तरह आप कह रहे थे वो जो French philosopher, there is a societal side, there's a technological side, all of that also needs to be discovered. तो वो तो जो I guess वो pilot भी काफी लंबा process. Now that you were talking about it, I was thinking it'll take a while. Now towards the end, Omer, this is a question which is something that because you've been in business और आपने एक चीज ground up से एक चीज build की है, I just want to ask you, how important do you think multinationals are for Pakistan?
I think they're extremely important in terms of showing the global community that there is global interest. When a company, a foreign company comes into Pakistan, or a Pakistani company goes into any other foreign territory, that's an expression of confidence into state policy, into the viability of the state, into the certainty of their policies, and the prosperity that this nation will bring towards them in the future. Because anyone coming into your country is not taking a 5-year view, they're taking a long-term view towards that. And if you look at some of these multinational giants that have stayed here before Pakistan was even born, it's representative of the fact that they have consistently invested in the country, taken out the dividends that they needed, but when they want to exit a country or sell their shares to a local party, that's also an expression of their lack of confidence on the promise of a state. And I think the biggest challenge for any country, whether your own people, your own investors, or for a foreign investor, is whether you believe in the promise that the future will bring. Whether you start believing and you don't believe in it and you've lost that confidence, then that's a systemic, fundamental issue that the nation needs to put its head together, and state institution needs to put their head together and solve. That we do not believe in the promise now. That promise, that commitment has to be believed in, and that's the fundamental architecture of any state. So a foreign company coming into the country, investing into the country, means that they now believe in the promise for at least 15, 20 years, right, that we will apply our capital, we'll have an ROI at the 4th or 5th or 6th or 7th year, and then we're here to draw the dividends from that jurisdiction. So yes, in that sense, foreign investors coming into the country is very important. fresh liquidity is always good for any community. That there'll be more players, they bring their own dynamism into an economy. They create a skill set that may be lacking in the country because our own educational infrastructure is not producing that skill.
Now let's end with, what are your growth aspirations 2025 and beyond? Are you looking for new clients? Are you looking to open, let's say, new services? What are those growth aspirations, and who are those people that probably need to know about Haball and they are currently not your customers, or you would like them to be your customers? What's that space?
We're looking at both horizontal and vertical growth. So let's start with vertical. That just within Pakistan, we have 60 supply chains, and that's not enough. There are potentially 350 supply chains that we can address. In terms of volume, the supply chain financing credit gap in Pakistan is anywhere between $10 to $25 billion. We're not even $120 million at this point in time. So this is a huge gap that needs to be served. In payments, the overall B2B traffic that we can service, we're close to 1% of that. So you can imagine there's so much more to do within Pakistan. And now that we have this digital real estate where we're serving the distributor community or the manufacturers, there is so much more financial productization that we can build around this. So yes, within Pakistan, this is just the beginning. This is so much more to do. And Pakistan is a long game. The economy is asymmetric. The cycles are very short. So you have to be for the long run. There's no short sprint over here. That's the Pakistan plan. But what we've built is indigenous Islamic financial solutions that have a market in other Muslim countries. And so we're also exploring that within the region, that how can we bring supply chain financing? Because to our surprise, in the few sort of discovery visits that we've made within the region, Central Asia and Middle East, supply chain financing is equally underserved in those localities as well. Even the large oil-rich economies, it's highly underserved. So those are some things that we are now aggressively exploring, and we'll announce around that as well. But in Pakistan, if this was just a Pakistani story, which we don't intend it to be, the mission is far from over. There's so much more to do.
Good luck, Omer. I hope some of this content also helps with your discovery and your understanding to other markets that you want to enter as well. And is there anything else that you would like to add? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the things that become part of your spirit as a founder or as a CEO, trying to do something disruptive or innovative in this market, is that you have to recognize the complexities and the asymmetry of the Pakistani economic life cycle. And with that, I think our patience wears out very quickly, especially when you have cheap liquidity from venture capital that just funds it and you can just flush it down the drain. With that mindset comes this, in Arabic इसको कहते हैं हुब्बे आजिला, उजलत से मोहब्बत करना, जल्दी से मोहब्बत करना. ये हुब्बे आजिला जो है वो हमें बहुत दफ़ा 99% डुबा देता है. तो एसिमेट्री को अब्जॉर्ब करना, इसके लिए बहुत सब्र चाहिए और बहुत यकीन चाहिए. और यकीन और सब्र के बगैर कुछ नहीं काम हो. कोई ज़िंदगी का बड़ा काम नहीं हो सकता. कोई रिश्ता नहीं आप निभा सकते, कोई कारोबार नहीं चला सकते. कुछ आइए कि पाकिस्तान की पूरी इकॉनमी को ट्रांसपेरेंट बना देना 5 साल 10 साल 20 साल, ये यकीन और सब्र के बगैर तो बिल्कुल नहीं हो सकता. और शक जो है और उजलत जो है, ये एक दीमक है जो ख़राब कर देती है किसी भी रिश्ते को और किसी भी परसूट को, किसी भी कैंपेन को. एक बहुत बड़ी कैंपेन है जो हमारी पूरी फाइनेंशियल सर्विसेज का इकोसिस्टम, डिजिटल बैंक्स, बैंकिंग के डिजिटल डिपार्टमेंट्स, सारी हम जितनी भी फिनटेक्स हैं 40-50, हम सब एक कैंपेन को रैली कर रहे हैं कि ये चीज़ होगी और हम सब पाकिस्तानी हैं और हम उसके मुअस्सिस होंगे, मुअज्जद होंगे, उससे मुस्तफ़ीद भी होंगे. ये सब काम हम करेंगे और हमारे मुल्क को उससे फ़ायदा होगा, हमारी इकॉनमी ज़्यादा एफिशिएंट हो जाएगी. इसमें अगर शक व शुबहात हो, अपने ही बारे में, अपनी ज़ात के बारे में, अपनी आइडेंटिटी के बारे में, अपने रियासत के साथ रिश्ते के बारे में। और इसमें अगर उजलत हो कि बार बार जल्दी कि क्यों नहीं हो रहा, मैं थक गया, मैं हार गया, मैं जा रहा हूँ, ये इट कैन नॉट वर्क दैन। यू हैव टू रिमेन फर्म with a lot of certitude and with a lot of patience, like a mountain, well pegged, entrenched.
Amazing, Omer. Thank you and I hope we continue to have this conversation because it's been wonderful, and the way you have sort of structured some of those responses, and the fact that you are a student of history and philosophy. So we hope to have this going with you. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right.